Let us now turn our attention to the question, what was the attitude of the founders of America toward Islam from the very beginning of our nation? After all, these were the men that orchestrated this grand republic. They had very specific ideas about what this republic is about. What does it mean to have freedom of religion? What should be our attitude toward non-Christian religions, alternative ideologies? As it turns out, they had very specific views on this subject. Take, for example, John Quincy Adams, the son of John Adams, who served as our second president and first vice president, quintessential founder. His son, very active, very involved in the founding of our nation, had a very distinguished political career of service, including serving in both the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and even serving as our sixth president. In a document that was designed to gather materials that had been produced during the early years of our nation and published in a publication called the American Annual Register, John Quincy Adams had a series of essays on the Russo-Turkish War, which he wrote in 1827. Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims were at war with what was then considered a Christian country, Russia. This was before the communists took over Russia. In these essays, John Quincy Adams made some observations about Islam and its impact on the world of his day. Read this with me. In the 7th century of the Christian era, a wandering Arab of the lineage of Hagar, the Egyptian, combining the powers of transcendent genius with the preternatural energy of a fanatic and the fraudulent spirit of an impostor, proclaimed himself as a messenger from heaven and spread desolation and delusion over an extensive portion of the earth. Adopting from the sublime conception of the Mosaic law the doctrine of one omnipotent God, he connected indissolubly with it the audacious falsehood that he was himself his prophet and apostle. Adopting from the new revelation of Jesus the faith and hope of immortal life and of future retribution, he humbled it to the dust by adapting all the rewards and sanctions of his religion to the gratification of the sexual passion. He poisoned the sources of human felicity at the fountain by degrading the condition of the female sex and the allowance of polygamy. And he declared undistinguishing and exterminating war as part of his religion against all the rest of mankind. The essence of his doctrine was violence and lust, to exalt the brutal over the spiritual part of human nature. Between these two religions, thus contrasted in their characters, a war of 1,200 years has already raged. That war is yet flagrant, nor can it cease but by the extinction of that imposture which has been permitted by providence to prolong the degeneracy of man. While the merciless and dissolute dogmas of the false prophet shall furnish motives to human action, there can never be peace upon earth and goodwill towards men. The hand of Ishmael will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. A quotation from the book of Genesis. The precept of the Quran is perpetual war against all who deny that Muhammad is the prophet of God. The vanquished may purchase their lives by the payment of tribute. The victorious may be appeased by a false and delusive promise of peace, and the faithful follower of the prophet may submit to the imperious necessities of defeat. But the command to propagate the Muslim creed by the sword is always obligatory when it can be made effective. The commands of the prophet may be performed alike by fraud or by force. This, of course, the view of a very prominent founder who was there, who examined history, who saw what was going on, and certainly constitutes an authoritative source. Let me show you another letter. In fact, I'm showing you the letter in its original form. This is the actual letter that was written, in which Thomas Jefferson and John Adams were authorized by Congress to negotiate with the Muslim terrorists who continually raided American ships off the coast of North Africa. Adams and Jefferson met in London in 1786 with the ambassador from one of the Muslim countries, Tripoli, and on March 28th wrote this letter to John Jay reporting their conversation with the ambassador. Look at their observation. We, that is we, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, took the liberty to make some inquiries concerning the grounds of their pretensions to make war upon nations who had done them no injury, and observed that we considered all mankind, we Americans considered all mankind as our friends who had done us no wrong, nor had given us any provocation. The ambassador answered us that it was founded on the laws of their prophet, that it was written in their Quran, that all nations who should not have acknowledged their authority were sinners, that it was their right and duty to make war upon them wherever they could be found, and to make slaves of all they could take as prisoners, and that every Mussulman who should be slain in battle was sure to go to paradise. That it was a law that the first who boards an enemy's vessel should have one slave more than his share with the rest, which operated as an incentive to the most desperate valor and enterprise. That it was the practice of their corsairs to bear down upon a ship, for each sailor to take a dagger in each hand and another in his mouth, and leap on board, which so terrified their enemies that very few ever stood against them. That he verily believed that the devil assisted his countrymen, for they were almost always successful. Here is a very candid declaration by a very prominent representative of one of the prominent Muslim countries in North Africa. And there was an instance of the contact point between Islam and the founders of our civilization. Let me call your attention now to a specific law case that went all the way to the Supreme Court of New York, the state of New York, dated August 1811 in the case People versus Ruggles. Here are the circumstances of this particular case. The defendant, who was placed on trial, was guilty of wickedly, maliciously, and blasphemously uttering and with a loud voice publishing in the presence and hearing of divers good and Christian people of and concerning the Christian religion, of and concerning Jesus Christ, the false, scandalous, malicious, wicked, blasphemous words following. I'll let you read what he was accused of saying. This defendant was tried, found guilty, sentenced by the court to be in prison for 3 months and to pay a fine of $500. His defense attorney tried to argue that Christianity does not make up a part of the common law of the state, that as a matter of fact, the Constitution allows a free toleration to all religions and all kinds of worship. The exception as to licentiousness, that is immoral behavior, refers to conduct, not opinions. Judaism, Mohammedanism, notice that's a reference to Islam, may be preached here without any legal animadversion. For aught that appears, the prisoner could have been a Jew, a Mohammedan, or a Socinian. If so, he had a right by the Constitution to declare his opinions. So you see the situation. Here's the defense attorney arguing, hey, Islam can be preached here and therefore we can preach against Christianity and speak against Jesus Christ. Well, the court did not agree. In fact, it vehemently disagreed. In fact, the one who wrote the opinion of the court has gone down in history as one of our fathers of American jurisprudence, the Chief Justice James Kent, who wrote a monumental series of volumes, Commentaries on American Law. Observe what he said in response to the defense attorney's argumentation. The free, equal, and undisturbed enjoyment of religious opinion, whatever it may be, and free and decent discussions on any religious subject is granted and secured. But to revile with malicious and blasphemous contempt the religion professed by almost the whole community is an abuse of that right. Nor are we bound by any expressions in the Constitution, as some have strangely supposed, either not to punish at all or to punish indiscriminately the like attacks upon the religion of Muhammad or the Grand Lama. Notice what Justice Kent is arguing. He's saying, yes, we have freedom of religion in this country. But that does not mean that you can go around and undermine the very foundations of our civilization, because the foundations of our civilization are rooted in and intertwined with the principles of Christianity. On the other hand, it is permissible. So the Constitution does not allow you to badmouth Christianity. However, it is permissible for you to speak against the religion of Muhammad or the Grand Lama, the Dalai Lama, Buddhism. Yeah, it's okay to speak against those religions. Why? Notice what the justice said. For this plain reason, the case assumes we are a Christian people. The morality of the country is deeply engrafted on Christianity, not on the doctrines or worship of those impostors. Notice the view of the founders regarding Islam and other non-Christian religions. Have you noticed that our civilization is turning away from Christianity? We are also becoming a nation that is less courteous, less manners, less of Christ's principle, treat others the way you want to be treated, which is precisely what reigns and prevails in Islamic countries all over this world. Why is America becoming less mannered, less civil? Well, in this very case, Chief Justice Kent made the comment that we in the past have been a people whose manners are refined and whose morals have been elevated and inspired with a more enlarged benevolence by means of the Christian religion. What a tremendous commentary on how great our nation has been and how our greatness is waning because we are moving aside, moving away from Christianity, stripping out of our civilization our Christian values. Let me call your attention to another founder. These are all founders of our country. James Iredell, who was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by our first president, George Washington, and he served on the court from 1790 to 1799. In their discussions of the Constitution, he observed some of the views of the other founders. He said, "It is objected that the people of America may perhaps choose representatives who have no religion at all, and that pagans and Mohammedans may be admitted into offices." Notice the thinking here. Here we are putting together a Constitution. We're not putting enough safeguards in here to make certain that people who hold non-Christian views, who are members of non-Christian religions, or people who are irreligious, pagans, atheists, we're not really putting safeguards in here to keep them from holding public office. The founders were concerned about that. Look at his solution. But it is never to be supposed that the people of America will trust their dearest rights to persons who have no religion at all, or a religion materially different from their own. The founders would be heartsick to know that the state of Minnesota installed Keith Ellison, a Muslim, in the U.S. House on their behalf. And there have been other such encroachments. It shows the damage that has been inflicted on our civilization by the doctrine of political correctness and the insane notion of celebrating diversity with regard to ideology, religion, and morality. Another one of our founders who became governor of his home state of North Carolina, Samuel Johnston, also a member of the ratifying convention for the Constitution. Notice what he said on this matter. "It is apprehended that Jews, Mohammedans, those are Muslims, pagans, and others, may be elected to high offices under the government of the United States." But notice, those who are Mohammedans or any others who are not professors of the Christian religion can never be elected to the office of president or other high office, but in one of two cases. First, if the people of America lay aside the Christian religion altogether, it may happen. Should this unfortunately take place, then the people will choose such men as think as they do themselves. Folks, That is a sad, virtually prophetic commentary. He looked 2 centuries down through time and said the only way Americans would ever celebrate diversity and install into prominent positions in their civilization, in the social fabric of their nation, individuals who hold religions that are so contrary to Christianity, would be if the people themselves have moved in that direction, have bought into false ideas that cause them then to jeopardize our civilization by allowing the influx and the permeation of our civilization by non-Christian ideologies. Another great founder, Elias Budino, who served as the president of the Continental Congress for a period of time, very active in the founding of our civilization. Look at his comments in his response, by the way, to Tom Paine's The Age of Reason. Elias Budino's response is titled The Age of Revelation, that is, the Word of God. Did not Moses and Christ show their divine mission, not only by the nature and effects of their doctrines and precepts, but also by doing good in the presence of all the people, works that no other men ever did? That is absolutely true. Jesus and Moses both performed miracles in harmony with the Bible doctrine that in order to authenticate your verbal declarations as proving to people they are from God, you must authenticate your oral proclamations as being of divine origin by backing it up with miraculous confirmation. Muhammad didn't do that. But as Elias Budino points out, Jesus and Moses did. True emissaries of God always did. He said, but Muhammad aimed to establish his pretensions to divine authority by the power of the sword and the terrors of his government, while he carefully avoided any attempts at miracles in the presence of his followers and all pretenses to foretell things to come. The laws of Muhammad and other impostors have generally been compiled by degrees according to the exigencies of the states, the prevalence of particular factions, or the authority who governed the people at his own will. Muhammad made his laws not to curb, but humor the genius of the people. They were therefore altered and repealed from the same causes. These are tremendous insights. Then he asks this incredible rhetorical question that carries its own inbuilt answer. Where is the comparison between the supposed prophet of Mecca and the Son of God? Or with what propriety ought they to be named together? The difference between these characters is so great that the facts need not be further applied. Another one of our fathers of American jurisprudence, Joseph Story. He was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by President James Madison, another founder. And Joseph Story served in the capacity on the U.S. Supreme Court for over 30 years. In commenting on the ratification of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, listen closely. The real object, he said, of the First Amendment, and he ought to know he was there, one of the founders, a father of our legal thinking. The real object of the First Amendment was not to countenance, much less to advance, Mohammedanism, Islam, or Judaism, or infidelity by prostrating Christianity? Absolutely not. The founders did not view all religions with a level perspective, as if they were all equally authentic, equally legitimate, equally valuable. Absolutely not. They saw Christianity as the one true religion, and all other religions were not acceptable. He then proceeded to say, but here's the purpose of the First Amendment, the real object of it, to exclude all rivalry among Christian sects, and to prevent any national ecclesiastical establishment which should give to a hierarchy the exclusive patronage of the national government. In other words, the purpose of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, was to keep one Christian group from getting above the other by receiving state acceptance, becoming the state religion. Do you see that? The founders never envisioned freedom of religion to extend to all these non-Christian religions, other than the fact that they would be allowed to come to our country and not be persecuted. But freedom of religion did not mean that we would accommodate it and alter our institutions in order for it to be accepted. No, it would simply be tolerated as a false religion, as long as it did not interfere with our civilization. Let's move to yet another, Jedediah Morse. His son Samuel Morse invented the Morse code. Jedediah Morse delivered a sermon on April 25th, 1799 in Charlestown, Massachusetts, entitled "The Present Dangers and Consequent Duties of the United States of America." What a tremendous message. It needs to be heralded across our nation today, throughout our hills and hamlets. Let's read it together. Our dangers are of two kinds: those which affect our religion and those which affect our government. They are, however, so closely allied that they cannot, with propriety, be separated. Notice that. Whatever affects our religion affects our country, our state, our government, and vice versa. The foundations which support the interests of Christianity are also necessary to support a free and equal government like our own. May I ask you this question very quickly? Who believes that in our country today? That the only way to support and maintain our country is to support, encourage, and maintain our Christian religion? That they go together, that they stand or fall together? I'm telling you, that's what the founders believed. And as that is no longer the belief of a majority of our leaders, let alone our population, to that extent we are in imminent peril. Notice what else this great man from the founding era said. In all those countries where there is little or no religion, or a very, listen, gross and corrupt one, as in Mohammedan and pagan countries, there you will find, with scarcely a single exception, arbitrary and tyrannical governments, gross ignorance and wickedness, and deplorable wretchedness among the people. With all the kindness I can muster, I ask you, has it changed in 200 years? As you look out over the surface of the planet and look at all of the countries that either embrace Islam and promote Islam, or that embrace some other religion such as Hinduism or Buddhism, look at all of those countries. What is their condition today? Are they not in precisely the condition that this founder said those countries were in his day as well? Observe what else he says. To the kindly influence of Christianity, we owe that degree of civil freedom and political and social happiness which mankind now enjoy, in proportion as the genuine effects of Christianity are diminished in any nation, either through unbelief or the corruption of its doctrines or the neglect of its institutions. We're seeing that right now in America. The polls show that fewer than 50% of Americans even go to church anymore, neglecting its institutions. All right, in the same proportion will the people of that nation recede from the blessings of genuine freedom and approximate the miseries of complete despotism. I hold this to be a truth confirmed by experience. If so, it follows all efforts made to destroy the foundations of our holy religion, that's Christianity, ultimately tend to the subversion also of our political freedom and happiness. And notice this final mournful, sad, earth-shaking observation. Wherever the pillars of Christianity shall be overthrown, our present republican forms of government and all the blessings which flow from them that you and I wallow in every day, that must fall with them. What a tragic and sad prediction. You know, due to the widespread expulsion of God, the Bible, and Christianity from our national life, from our schools, from our institutions, from our country, all of this fomented by the liberal forces of political correctness, diversity, tolerance, Folks, all of these anti-Christian ideologies like Islam are encroaching. And I am convinced they will hasten the demise of the American Republic. They are perfectly willing to aid us in our suicidal behavior. Before we close, let's turn our attention very quickly to the matter of what are we to do. What would God have us to do? Well, I believe the Bible is very specific. May God motivate us to do what Jesus said to do in Matthew 5, and that is to love everybody. We ought to love Muslims. Jesus said, I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you. Now, we need to live that out. We need to model that in our lives. We ought to be respectful. We ought to be kind. You know, there are places like Islamic countries where you go and people are kind of rude and brash. We must not be that way. We ought to show respect. Now, that may be viewed as weakness and given allowing a person a ticket to brush us aside, but nevertheless, true Christianity is not coercive. We're not threatening. We want to be kind to people and be respectful and treat them the way we want to be treated. That's the heart and soul of Christianity. And may I suggest to you, we ought to make tremendous efforts to evangelize Muslims. See, political correctness and diversity has bullied us, intimidated us into silence where, oh no, you don't want to push your views on anybody else. Well, we're not wanting to push our views on anybody, but we're wanting to do what God did, and that's articulate the truth to human beings. That's the only hope they have, to spend eternity with Him. We have an obligation, certainly in kindness, love, and truth, to speak the truth in love. We ought to tell people the gospel. The gospel is God's power. It's the most powerful tool that God has given us to impact people. So we need to explain New Testament Christianity to them. The most powerful force for changing people, the gospel of Christ, God's love. You know, it's conspicuous in the Quran. God is not depicted as a very loving, caring individual. But the Bible presents Him that way. God went to great lengths out of His love to make it possible for people to be forgiven. Well, we need to promote that and advance that. You know, I've been hearing in the news a lot because of this political correctness that's gone to seed. Well, you know, you're Islamophobic. You're Islamophobic. You hate Muslims and so forth. Islamophobia is defined as prejudice against, hatred, or irrational fear of Islam or Muslims. Allow me to comment on that for just a moment. The fact of the matter is, Christians are people. If you're a true Christian, or if you're following Christianity properly, you would never hate Muslims. Oh no, we would not harbor prejudice against them. Absolutely not. So that's a misrepresentation right there. There may be people who have shown hatred toward Muslims, but that's not Christianity. Don't pin that on Christianity. We do not hate anybody. And yet, an informed Christian, an informed American, recognizes the fundamental threat that Islam poses to the freedom to practice one's religion and one's beliefs without fear of persecution. Come now, let's get real. If you had lived on December 7, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed and some 3,000 of our sailor boys were killed, was America suddenly Japophobic or Nazi-phobic because they went to war with Japan and Germany whenever we were attacked? When there are such serious threats to our national identity and our national existence, the fact that we respond intelligently and react, does that make us somehow phobic? That's ridiculous. That's a piece of propaganda that no one should be fooled by. It's absolute nonsense. Are Americans today irrationally or in any way inappropriately concerned about terrorism, since, after all, some 3,000 Americans were killed by Muslim terrorists? We're not guilty of being phobic about it, Islamic phobic. Indeed, if we are not concerned about the Islamic connections to those kinds of actions, we are fools, and we deserve to go down in view of such foolishness. Most Americans, I believe, are not that foolish, as long as they've been alerted, and we need to get the word out. Let me suggest a couple of items to you with regard to what we ought to do simply as Americans. Apart from our Christianity, although I wouldn't want these in any way to disagree with each other, they ought to be consistent. But from the perspective of being a citizen of America, number one, we should not persecute anybody, but we shouldn't be giving accommodation to Muslims. What do I mean by that? We should not be allowing prayer rooms to be provided at taxpayer expense in public facilities, in universities, and airports, and other places all over this country. There's nothing in the Constitution that even implies that we ought to be doing that. That is encouraging the promotion of false religion. We shouldn't be doing that. We certainly should not be allowing our school curricula to be tampered with in order to appease and to include information about Islam. Letting children role play Islamic prayers and so forth, that's nonsense. There's no Islamic country on the planet that would allow you to do that with Christianity. And I don't blame them. They don't believe in that. So there should be no refurbishing of our school system in order to try to convey the idea to our adolescent population that there's some legitimacy to this religion. Our zoning boards all over our country, these are elected officials. The people have a right to decide what is going to be built in their community. No zoning permission ought to be given to construct mosques and other facilities that promote ideologies that are harmful to our nation. You say, well, wait a minute, you can't stop that. What are you talking about? We've been stopping that from the very beginning. Our zoning commissions have stopped pornographic houses. They have stopped alcoholic saloons and bars from going in. They've prevented brothels from taking. What if a group came and said, hey, we're a religion and you got freedom of religion, First Amendment, you got to let us build a church building here. And as a matter of fact, our central doctrine is we're going to have about 50 different prostitutes, like the Temple of Ephesus, where Dionysia and Aphrodite were there, and you have temple prostitutes come in and so forth. Well, Americans historically would say, no, you can't have that religion. You can't build that building. We're not going to give permission for that. And they would have been perfectly justifiable in rejecting that request, and it would not have been a violation of the Constitution. So we as Americans had better wake up on this. We'd better get busy alerting others to the truth about Islam and what the Quran actually says. In fact, why don't we rent interstate billboards all over the country and put nothing on them except passages from the Quran that talk about women, that talk about violence, that give their view concerning Christ? I mean, not one word of commentary, just the passage. Let Americans know, here's what the Quran teaches. I assure you there would be a howl of protest go up all over this nation from liberals and from Muslims. Liberals because, that's hate speech, and Muslims because, we don't really want people to know really what the Quran actually teaches on these things. But it's time to alert people. And may I suggest to you, you had better vote only for people on all levels of government, local, state, and federal, that know history and that know the truth about this subject and this religion. May God bless us in our efforts to represent Him accurately and to do His will in this country and beyond with regard to this religion. If you appreciate this seminar on Islam and the Quran, you will want to read the book on which it was based, The Quran Unveiled. This volume gives a great deal of additional information not included in the DVD seminar. Also available are study guides that supplement your viewing of the DVD. The study guides, the book, as well as additional copies of the DVD may all be purchased at apologeticspress.org. or by calling toll-free 800-234-8558.